Welcome, everyone, to this episode where we discuss with three eminent panel members where do we begin to rebuild. In our first session, we spoke extensively on what grief feels like. Where do we start looking at and talking about grief? Because grief is this unspoken emotion. Rarely do families, workplaces, and homes, communities, and neighborhoods speak about grief. In fact, just before the start of the session, I was doing one particular workshop on grief, and one of them said, it's always believed that you never speak about grief. The less you speak about it, the more it feels like it will go away and that we will recover. The second challenge that we are looking at is that the extent of grief that the universe is today experiencing is unprecedented. I don't think in our times we have seen a time when almost every fourth person that you encountered knew someone who's grieving or was personally grieving or has experienced loss deeply personally within that circle that in which we think there is a safe bubble. That is the reason why hopeworks foundation, skills cafe, and definitely all our partner organizations have come together to say, how do we make the language of grief something that's comfortable that we can use? How do we make ourselves available for conversations on grief so that we can enable everyone who's grieving to recover and rebuild over a period of time instead of leaving the person in grief to be alone and hope somehow they will overcome it by themselves? This is a collective of professionals coming together to help one another and help and reach anyone who might need help. And today, I'm very grateful to have this panel with us. Dr. Brunda Amruthraj, of course, comes with enormous years of experience of having worked in spaces where few of us would have really stepped foot into. What gives me great happiness is that I've known Dr. Brinda personally for I think over 20 years now, and she has remained the go to person every time I think I'm handling something that needs an expert to talk to them. There was no better person that I could think of than a person on whom even United Nations relies in order to move through this period. Welcome, Dr. Brinda. Next, we have with us Advocate Celin Thomas. When I was looking for someone who could speak passionately, purposefully, and practically about what do we need to do to move through this phase of grief to growth from a legal perspective, I was recommended Advocate Celin. And when I texted her, she immediately agreed and said, of course, we can do this. And then she asked me, there are so many things to be discussed in this area. What all can we cover? And I know we have 1 hour here. And I know that this may require multiple sessions. And we do hope through this journey of grief to growth that all of us are undertaking, maybe we will actually have many more sessions with her to understand the many different dimensions of legally how do we move ahead. The third panel member I've had is Jigisha, and I know I've known her, known of her work in helping people to truly feel financially safe. And Jigisha, I must say that the first time I spoke to you, you asked me if I have a financial plan. I didn't have one then, but I do realize I need to have one now at least. Every time I speak, especially to women who've lost their spouses, the greatest struggle is not just the loss of a life partner, but the fear of how do I move ahead? Questions about livelihood and quality of life come up so strongly. And I can't think of a better speaker than you to really help us all realize the need to be pragmatic when it comes down to creating our financial safety nets, especially when all of us are going through this amount of fear of what the future holds for us. And to help us navigate this very sensitive conversation, we have with us Supriya, and I always say Supriya is more than a moderator here. Supriya is a story in herself. In fact, in our first session, when Supriya spoke about her experience of loss, grief, and how she's working through it even now, I think there were very few who did not feel teary eyed. Supriya, I'm honored that you accepted our invitation to come here and moderate this very important conversation that we are doing today on how to rebuild. And most certainly, I have somebody here who's not on my presentation, but definitely is here. And he's a gentleman that I have known for a long time now, recently has experienced grief in his own way. And I'm inviting him to open the session today by talking about one particular perspective, and that is how difficult is it for gentlemen to grieve, to talk of loss, because they have in so many ways been socialized and not given license to grieve. Over to you, Sanjay, and over to the moderator and the panelists for an hour of, I'm sure, very, very stirring conversation. Thank you. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Jacinta. And yes, I will endorse fully what Jacinta was saying. We have been totally tuned to that men can't cry. Men have a challenge inherently also showing grief. And I'm talking a very recent happening. Less than 2 months back, my elder brother in law passed away all of a sudden. Very good health, no challenges at all, nothing expected. And I had met him 2, 3 weeks before that in Delhi before coming back to Bangalore. So when I got the news, the first item in mind was, I don't believe it. I don't believe it because it was something which was not expected. Anyway, what happened? Reached Delhi. My elder sister, who's pretty much in a similar mold as me, was literally working like a automated. She did not know what was going on around her. She was taking steps as they were required. Had to arrange for the funeral, had to arrange for some food for people who were coming in. There was nobody else who was there. So the challenges do build in. How do men react? It's not that we don't feel grief. It's not that we don't feel that sad with that kind of a happening and that kind of a bolt out of the blue, which just leaves you shocked. But what ends up happening and our way of dealing with it is something which I would like to take the next 2 minutes, because this was a question which was put across to me. My sister has 2 children, both of them outside India, so neither one of them could come back quickly. My niece was coming back 2 days later, and my nephew, one of the challenges, we had to tell him, no, you stay put, you're not coming back. We will reach out and we will make sure your mother, your sister are joining you in about a week to 10 days time. However, in the absence of children, her only friends for my sister were me and my younger sister. So 3 of us siblings at that. The way we deal with it as men, and I will talk about a lot of the men around me, is we start getting into the way we are wired, possibly, or the way I'm wired, let me modify it, is I start getting into working at things, what needs to be done, take control of things. How do you get about doing the next thing? What is the next thing required? What is the next thing required? Till the time night approaches, people leave, and only the core family of maybe 4, 5, 10 people are left at home. that is the time we get into a discussion, we get into a perspective as to finding out what really went on, because we were not present. So, what really went on, how things transpired, what can be done, again, transactional. It still takes us easily 3 4 days. And this question was put to me by my niece's husband, because he looked at my brother in law as father, not as father in law. He said, how do you deal with such grief where you can't focus on anything? My response, the way I deal with it, get into transactions during the day. During the night time, we sit down, we talk about the person, and that slowly helps us let out the grief, let out the challenges, and also remember the person and the good times we had. Again, it's not an outpouring of grief with tears. There are very few people whom I know as men, fewer people who will cry. We have been inured against that. We have been told, no, you cannot do that from childhood. So it becomes a challenge. Transactions, yes. Evenings spent over time, reliving the memories of the person, and that helps. We can't walk away from those memories. We cannot forget the person. It still comes back. Whether you speak with your brother, with your sister, with your partner, whoever is close by, with the children, it's a time which actually helps mold us together closer because of that grief. It helps in terms of talking things, remembering things, and move on at the same time with life, because that's the other part of it. Whatever has gone on, we can't turn back time, unfortunately. But we have to look at what has to be done. And somewhere in my mind, that actually helps me cope partly. The grief stays on, it'll stay on up, I know, even for months to come. The biggest thing I'm dreading is the next 1 week, because therein is my elder sister's wedding anniversary and my brother in law's birthday. I don't know what I'll do during that time. It's a challenge. Yes, I will be talking to my sister. She's already outside India, but I will be talking to her. But I don't know how I'll deal with that. That's something which I have to live with that and cope with that. So, this is part of the grief which men face quietly, talking softly, expressing it. We have a challenge. Men are not as expressive most of the times. So, this is something which I will leave this group with to think over, ponder over, while I hand over to Supriya. Supriya, all yours to start the discussion. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share this.
Thank you, Sanjay. And thank you for opening your heart out to us and putting out this very important point for, I think, which will also be relevant to today's discussion about how men are sort of expected not to cry, not to grieve very openly, and they tend to deal with stuff transactionally. And I have seen that when I lost my husband, I was allowed to cry, but his brother was busy with the rituals, which I sort of felt are designed to keep people occupied during that time. So thank you so much for sharing your story today. And with that, I would like to invite the panel today to open today's roundtable on the rebuilding process, because like Jacinta said, the times that we're in, grief is all around us. Today, we are going to be focusing specifically on the loss of a loved one. And how do you rebuild after you've experienced that loss? And what I want to invite first, I would first like to invite Dr. Brunda, because again, going by my experience, you are sort of burdened with the process of dealing with things that happen after you've lost someone, and your emotions sort of take a back seat and you're left alone to deal with them as you will later on. But in today's discussion, I want to put the emotions first, and I would like to invite Dr. Brunda to tell us a few things, maybe 4 or 5 points of what somebody who's freshly grieving can start looking at to think through this process of rebuilding and growth. Over to you, Dr. Brunda.
Thank you, Supriya, and thank you, everyone. I cannot but agree with you more that we are all going through a terrible time of experiencing one loss or the other. It can be a parent, a sibling. Some of us are coping with multiple losses during this time. And it is only natural for us that when we are grieving, we go through a host of emotions: shock, denial. No, this cannot be happening to me. It cannot be happening to me. Pain, guilt. Was I there? I wasn't there for the person. I did something wrong. Or it can be anger, anger against the hospital, anger against the doctors, anger against people who have not followed the COVID protocols. A lot of depression, emptiness, loneliness, and of course, finally and slowly does come acceptance. Therefore, the first step in really healing is acknowledging our own emotions. Acknowledging grief and our emotions associated with grief is the first step. Because what is grief? It is really a reflection of a connection with our loved one that is lost. Hence, there is no way out of pain but to weave through pain. And we cannot heal if we don't feel. We cannot heal if we don't feel. Our grief is meant to be felt and not analyzed. Secondly, I really like this saying that says that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is the outspurt of the loss of a suffering that we are going through, the loss of a loved one. But suffering is all the thoughts that we have, all the negative thoughts that are floods our mind, the images that keeps coming to our mind of the last days with a loved person. That is what is suffering. The thoughts are what we need to control. What we need to know, my dear friends, is that we cannot go back and beat ourselves for doing something that was so normal for you. For example, your father had to be sent into the ICU because he was suffering. And now you beat yourself for that decision. It's not fair on yourself. And that really brings me to the third point of really during this time, more than ever, you need to nurture yourself. You need to really take care of your needs. You need to look after yourself. And you need to look after basic needs like your sleeping, eating, and listen to your bodily cues. Spend time recollecting happy memories of your loved one. Some days are really, really tough. Just say to yourself, yes, these are tough days, but this too will pass. Emotions are not static, but they too will pass. That other aspect is that grief is really needs a community to grieve with us. Mourning is always a collective experience. It gives loved ones a chance to say goodbye and to support friends and family in their time of grief. The COVID times have deprived us of this community healing. We have resorted to perhaps the digital ways of connecting with people. Yes, it is frustrating, but at the same time, better than nothing. Call friends, opt to talk to people, because when we share, a natural catharsis tends to happen. Similarly, practicing rituals can help life feel less chaotic and provide a sense of meaning and purpose. In every religion, there are rituals and practices. Unfortunately, during COVID times, we have been robbed of these rituals. However, it is important to complete these rituals while following COVID protocols. Over time, pain of loss slowly decreases and acceptance comes in. And that, my loved ones, is no more than acceptance is accepting the reality that my loved one is not there physically with me, but we have to create a new life and honor the person in their absence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very informative, Dr. Brunda, and I love the fact that which you said, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And the aspect that you mentioned about rituals is something that I've experienced myself. So thank you for sharing this. I think this is very helpful. And with that, I'd like to move on to Celin, because even though we are suffering, we are facing our emotions, some things are inevitable. There are legal and financial repercussions to losing a person. And I would hand over to Celin to take us through some of the things that you need to understand from a legal standpoint when you've lost someone that you love.
Thank you, Supriya. Thank you, Jacinta. Thank you, Sanjay, and all the organizers of this webinar. So I understand that the theme is, where do we begin rebuilding? So being an advocate, we lawyers are wired very differently through our course of education and also our practice. So I would say that with respect to the topic of this particular webinar, I would like to say that my 2 or 3 minutes is more about how to handle the situation with a lot of practicality and rationality. Although we acknowledge the fact that the families are grieving, but when it involves and entails the legal aspects of things, we have to look at it practically and rationally. So the first thing that I would request any family member to know about is, if there is a will, then you need to find out where it is. And more importantly, you need to be aware if there is a will or not. And once you have found out that there is a will, let me tell you what a will is. A will is a written testament of a person who has passed away. So he or she, before their death, when they are in sound mind and absolutely sane, in presence of witnesses, will make out a will wherein they will enter all their movable as well as immovable properties. By immovable, I mean an apartment or a house or a plot of land. And by movable, I mean jewelry or, important documents, things like that. So a combination of that will be written in the will. The will is nothing but a written testament of the person. Now, the thing about a will is, a will only takes effect after the death of the person. So the person who has written the will is also known as the testator. Now, what happens is that the wishes of the person are to be honored with respect to what is written in the will, in the testament. So usually there is an executor written in the will. Usually the people who are writing the will, they'll have a person who will be executing the will. The person who is executing the will, also known as the executor, will not be a part of the will, meaning he or she will not inherit from it. So this is completely a third person who's a part of the will. However, he or she is aware that the testator has appointed him or her as the executor of the will. You can have more than one executor also, because there is no way to say that this person is going to survive while the testator is alive, or what is the situation after the demise of the testator. So that being one part, then it is important that once you know that there is a will and the person close to you has passed away, leaving it for you, then you can read the will on your own, or you can approach an advocate. You have a liberty to do that. A will is usually written in a plain and simple language, but a lot of people take help and assistance from advocates as well. So you have the liberty to read it on your own as well as take assistance from an advocate. reach out to them, reach out to the people, reach out to the executor if you're familiar with who the executor is, because the details of the executor are also mentioned in the will. And most of the time, a copy of the will is also found with the executor. So, and usually an executor is a person who's very close to the testator as well. So when the testator passes away, the executor is well aware of his or her responsibilities. So they will show up and they will appear after the demise or during the funeral proceedings. Now, what happens is that if you have an executor in place, the duty of the executor is to go to the court and apply for probate. That's what the Indian Succession Act says. However, this aspect is not required for people who are Christians and Muslims. So we do have an aspect of personal law in our country. So that is something that we need to understand. And that is the very reason where the role of a lawyer is very important. You need to consult a lawyer so that you know that what all things are doable and what is not doable for you at this point. And also the lawyer can always handhold you through the entire steps. So the executor can also appoint an advocate, because usually in a will, when an executor is appointed, the executor is also going to be paid for disseminating and administering his job and his or her job. So what happens if there is no executor in a will, then the members of the family can always apply for letters of administration. That's what the Indian Succession Act says. So letters of administration is applicable when there is a will and there is no executor, or the family members themselves would want to execute the will, or it is also important to note that letters of administration is also applicable by beneficiaries when there is no will at all. So when there is no will at all, there is no written testament, the family which is closely associated with the deceased, or the ones who are related to the deceased, they can always stake their claim, but it is all completely subjective to the personal law applicable to the deceased. Now, with respect to the Hindu Succession Act, the Muslim personal law, as well as the laws which are applicable to several other religions that are being practiced in our country, it is going to be different, especially if the person who is deceased has left a lot of property behind, or both movable and immovable, but without a will. It does give rise to complications also. However, letters of administration is something that can ease up the difficulty. That also, for probate as well as for letters of administration, one needs to reach out to the appropriate court in your area. So if you are in a city,
I think I want to dig a little bit more deeper on the will aspect, but maybe before we go into that, I'd like Jigisha to sort of add a few more details on the financial aspect of it, to understand what are some of the things you need to do initially to sort out the finances. And why I'm saying that is because most people, at least in today's scenario, we are dealing with a lot of people who are in their early 30s, or even late 20s, that are passing away, and they haven't even thought of starting a will, right? So how do you deal with financial aspect when you lose somebody like that? And then we come back to legal in the aspect of what to do with when there is no will. So handing over to Jigisha for now.
Yes, thank you, Supriya, and thank you, Jacinta and Sanjay, for this opportunity. So yes, goodbyes are difficult, and all said and done, we have to, we are, troubling with the grief, but there are practical aspects which we need to look at, and it is critical to take a financial reality check. And no matter how hard it is, you have to deal with it. The questions can be, where do we start, where all the financial documents are, whether there is a will or not, whether you are a nominee in most of these financial documents and financial investments which are there, whether the property is owned jointly or not, whether these documents, what are the documents which are needed to close the accounts, to carry on with the, the succession plan and other stuff. So yes, there are most important aspects in terms of the financial things which we need to deal with.
So there are few things which you need to get it right, like, get the death certificate of the person who died, and not just one death certificate. You will need multiple copies. Make sure that the PAN cards, the name on the PAN cards and the death certificate matches. So, you don't struggle when you go to the bank account or you go to close other investments and other stuff. You don't struggle with the identity and the names, because you have to get it right. If the person has passed away in the hospital, you need to get first the letter from the hospital, the certificate from hospital, the cremation certificate, and then you approach within 21 days to get the death certificate from the municipal authorities in your local area. If there is a will, yes, you have to, read it and take the help of the professionals. If not, get the succession certificate. A lawyer will be able to help you get the succession certificate. The most important aspect is to locate the documents which are there for the financial assets, whether it's properties, whether it's a bank account, whether there are loans, EMIs, vehicle, any other investments like mutual fund, PPF, post office. There are so many things which you need to look into. If there is a will, yes, all these things will be documented and it will be there. But if there is no will, the first thing you need to look is to gather these documents. And if, you as a wife or as a child, if somebody has lost their parent or somebody has lost their husbands, if you are aware of these things, that will make the life easier if there is no will. Because most of the time, if the death is very sudden and you are not prepared and there is no will, knowing about the financial aspects helps. And you need to make, I think it would help to seek out a professional help, because, when you are grieving, I think there are a lot of things needs to be done in a time-bound period to approach the proper authorities and banks and other people to deal with this financial aspect. So it would help to have a good professional help who can, help you out with these documentations and other stuff. So I would say the quick thing is that, I guess when you are grieving, yes, grieve, but take a pause, gather your thoughts, gather yourself, seek help, understand where your cash flows and income is, list out all the documents, and it would just tremendously help if you start, putting the plan together and move ahead. That is from my side. Thanks.
Thanks, Jigisha. Just one quick follow-up question on that. When you were talking about, and I've experienced this myself, that you have a lot of paperwork to deal with, a lot of things to dig out and, make sense of what is happening with, that your loved ones' financials themselves. But when you look at a close family member's loss, you're also dealing with a financial backlash of sorts, because now you're suddenly dependent either on a single income, or in case elderly parents have lost their children who they were dependent on, then they are looking at the whole caregiving aspect of it as well, right? So what can people in that situation do to make sure that they're not financially in a bad shape? What are some of the steps they should start taking?
Well, the first aspect is, to check on the bank accounts whether there is any liquid amount or not lying there. I guess if that is there, if the contingency plan is there, normally if there is a financial advisor who is, there with the family, they always stress on one thing, is the emergency fund. If the emergency fund is there, yes, you take the, fall back on, and then, start living on that for at least next couple of months or 3-4 months. So that way you have a buffer. But if you don't have the emergency fund, I think you need to reach out to your immediate family to support you for at least few days and months, and as I said, if you approach a professional, they will be able to gather these things for you and start liquidating some of the assets so that you can start having a contingency plan in place. Now, I would just say that don't go to banks directly with the death certificate. Once you need to know that whether there is a joint account or not, whether the person is a joint owner or not, a wife or a parent or whoever it is. Now, because what happens if you just tell the bank that the person is deceased, they normally freeze the accounts. And then it is very difficult to withdraw any money or deposit any money. And I have experienced this in some of my clients' cases where they have just informed the bank that my father is no more or my husband is no more, and the bank just freezes the accounts, lockers, everything, whatever is there. Now, when you are, trying to redeem some of the investments where the checks are given, or transferred in the bank account, problem is that, the transfers doesn't happen. The amount doesn't come in because the accounts are frozen. So you have to be a little bit practical. And that is why I say that always go with a professional help. Reach out to your family and friends, ask them around if they know any such professional who will be able to help you out in dealing with this paperwork. Because I know, as you said, there are a lot of paperworks which are involved, a lot of follow-ups which needs to be, done. And each investment will take from a week to few months to close it, depending on what are the paperworks are required and what are the processes are. For example, if you go to post office savings schemes and other stuff, they insist that the person, the nominee comes physically and closes those accounts. So there are a lot of things which is there. And as I said, contingency plan has to be there.
Definitely. I think those are some very valid points, Jigisha. And Celin, I just wanted to know if you want to weigh in a little bit on this as well. Plus, to add to that, one more aspect of when somebody passes away, you mentioned a bit of claim. Others might also be there to claim it, because if the documentation and everything is not in order, the will is not in place. So along with Jigisha's points, could you also add to that?
Yes, just to continue with what Jigisha was saying, if the person who dies has got dependents who are senior citizens, then there are many aspects to this that you need to understand. That usually senior citizens who are maybe retired or are completely dependent on the deceased, they do have a right in their estate. Now, even if that person has written a will, then the beneficiaries of those will are also supposed to look after the elderly grandparents, in this case, parents or grandparents or even relatives. Now, the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007 clearly states that if any senior citizen has made a gift transfer. Now let's understand the difference between will and gift. Will comes into force when the person who has written the will is passed away, while a gift is usually an immediate transfer of property. So a senior citizen can actually avail benefit despite that they have done a gift deed. That is because they would want to be maintained by that person, because there is a relationship with the person to whom they have given the gift. So a senior citizen can actually be maintained by various ways, provided they are fully aware of all these provisions of law and they can get right kind of guidance. In addition to that, since Supriya, you mentioned about claims. Now, what happens is that if there is a will, then the only thing that needs to be obtained is a succession certificate, which the court is going to give you, provided you undergo file a probate through an executor, or you do a letter of administration. The beneficiary can do it. The beneficiary was mentioned in the will. Now, if suppose there is no will, still a letter of administration can be filed by one of the beneficiaries or the people who are related with the deceased person, so that they can get a succession certificate and they can inherit the asset or the estate of the deceased person. Now, with respect to claims, now what happens is, maybe this person who was deceased was a creditor to somebody else. and there is a document to that effect that says that maybe this person gave 5 lakh of loan, maybe 2 or 3 years before he or she deceased. So the beneficiaries or the people who are related to the deceased can actually claim that 5 lakhs from that person, from the debtor. And vice versa, if suppose the person who passed away, who is deceased, owed someone money, and if the family inherits the estate and assets of this deceased, then the creditor who had given money to the deceased can actually make the beneficiaries of this particular will and estate as legal representatives of the deceased and claim the money from them. So these aspects are also there that we need to keep in mind.
Sure. Thank you, Celin. I think that was very informative. And Dr. Brunda, just coming back to you on this one quick question. Uh, we talked about the emotional aspects, and you did mention 5 points that people have to consider while, when they're freshly dealing with grief. But at the same time, all of this is also going on, right? Trying to find papers, trying to figure out the will, talking to professionals, going to courts. How do you deal with that, right? Any quick tips on balancing this out? You're on mute, Dr. Brunda.
Sorry. Yeah. So actually, when there is a grief or a loss, most often, like Sanjay also explained, most people go through all of this in a very mechanical way, what needs to be done during the day. But it is actually the night time when it starts hitting them. So that is where the nurturing to self also take time off. Every time you go to a bank or you go to a lawyer, brings back a lot of memories, brings back, and you would have opened those lockers, you would have found out so many things. It brings a lot of rich memories for you. Treasure those memories, because pain that you are going through is really the loss that one is suffering. Therefore, grief to growth really means that we work towards remembering the one who died with more love than with pain. So let's accumulate things, memories of love that we have for the person. That is an enriching experience.
Thank you. I think that was very powerful, and I can personally attest to the fact that I think after, when I was trying to sort through Gaurav's things, I have cried in every public place possible, in banks, in insurance offices, in hospitals, everywhere. So I would also add to that allow yourself to cry, because that's okay, and that goes for both genders. And that brings me to a bit of my next question as well, to all of you. How do you, and because Sanjay started that conversation, right? Is there something different in terms of emotional, legal, or financial aspects that men and women need to look at? Are there any key differences that you could possibly point out? Would you like to continue, Dr. Brunda, on this? And then maybe we could
So actually, I think a lot of it was touched by Sanjay, and you also mentioned that, Supriya, is that men do not cry. But like I mentioned, unless you feel, you don't heal, right? So they get involved in doing a lot of things. And from our experience, every time we talk to men, they say, it's okay, we are coming to terms. But the thing is that in grief, it is a process. So unless you allow yourself, you may want to talk to a trusted friend, you may want to talk to people you believe. But whereas women, of course, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of expression of emotions, which is helpful in that sense. And they also tend to seek a lot of social support. That also may be helpful sometimes.
Thank you. Yes, I think that is very true. So from a legal standpoint, Celin, do you think it's different? Like if you lose a spouse, and if, as a man, is there anything different that you need to look at versus if you were a woman?
With respect
sorry,
to the
and if you could add a element of personal law to this as well, because I think that applies quite significantly in this space.
it's a very good question that you asked, because when the deceased dies intestate, that's when the personal law comes into force. In the sense, if the deceased has died without a testament or a will, that's when personal law usually comes into force. So with respect to the Hindu Succession Act, the way how a deceased woman's property gets disseminated is different from how the property of a male Hindu gets disseminated. So I think yes, it is going to be different from the male and female aspect of the deceased. It will be different. But if there is a will, then we follow the will invariably. But there is a good thing. There is one good news, I would say. The Supreme Court has laid out that there is a 3-year time period given to those who stand to benefit from the deceased property and estate. They are given 3 years time period to apply for probate as well as letters of administration. However, we need to remember one thing, that banks and insurance agencies and mutual funds, they operate on their own time scale. So that is something for which you need to reach out to directly the bank, or you need to go through your financial advisor. Of course, in a lot of cases, many people don't have a dedicated financial advisor, but they do have accountants and chartered accountants who can help them. So with respect to banks and all, they all function at a particular time limit. The moment they are intimated that this person has expired, then they usually ask for a death certificate, and only then they start their proceedings. And most of them ask for a court order, which is nothing but a succession certificate that they ask for. I could also see few questions, Supriya.
Yeah. So, which is, I was just going to ask you that you mentioned from Hindu personal law standpoint, but specifically with Christian, there's a question that if there is, even if there's a will, can a successor sort of just take without the help of an advocate, between mutual, understanding of those mentioned in the will, can the successor just take possession of the property? And this is with respect to.
So I had mentioned this earlier, that with respect to Christians and Muslims, they don't need to really file for a probate. So what you're talking about is that if there is a mutual understanding, you don't really need to apply for a probate. You can go ahead and distribute your property amongst yourself.
Thank you.
That's how it is.
So Jigisha, on the question that I had asked Celin, similar to, men versus women, is there any difference in how they need to go about financial proceedings? Plus, what takes precedence if you have a nominee in one of your financial instruments versus what is mentioned in the will, and how do people then resolve that?
Right. So, see, often I've seen that men are normally aware about the financial situations, and they have because they are the ones who, most of the cases in India, decides about the investments, and they would have the fair knowledge about what is where. Because they are most of the time, if they are the breadwinners, they know where the investments are. The problem comes when, women who loses her husband, and she is not aware of, most of the things, because if there is an absence of will, if there is a will, yes, it is straightforward that you go and, take out the details from there and start implementing that. But if there is no will, often women are not aware about this, that what they need to do. So that's where, if they can seek out a professional help, that would help. But no matter what, I think they should start, keeping themselves informed about all these things. One is to start collecting the documents, spread out the documents in 4 baskets, whether they are assets, whether it's movable, immovable properties, bank accounts, mutual fund investments, whatever investments are there, they form your assets. If there is any liabilities, like say home loans or EMIs or any car loans, whatever it is. The third basket is that what are your expenses? Whether it's a kid's education, electricity bill, utility bills, whatever it is, list down what are your expenses, and then start finding out that what are your incomes. And often in these cases, you tend to forget that you have to also notify the employer of the deceased. If the person is working in one of the companies, then you have to notify them, because often the companies will have the insurances, for their employees, and you need to seek out the employers to settle the insurance claims, because that is the immediate financial help which you can rely on. Other things, yes, if there are any other insurance policies, and you go and start naming those and start seeking out the taking out the financial support from these things. If there are any other income, say if you have a property and you have rented it out, if you have any other sort of income like fixed deposits, interest, and other stuff, you need to start writing it down, so that you can start managing your expenses, because the immediate thing is that you have to, no matter what, at the end of the day, you have to pay the bills. So these aspects will help. And I would suggest, if women will start taking interest in this, I think they manage their houses, so even these things also, it's a piece of cake for them. So just rely on somebody and start your journey in understanding these financials, because this will go a long way. And the most important thing, if the woman is educated, I would suggest that they should start looking out for becoming self-sufficient and start earning, because probably they can take some time to grieve, but go out and start getting employment, so that you can, because if it's a long journey for women, if they are young, financial independence is something they need to look out for. So
I think I totally agree with that point on financial independence. And I think even when you are experiencing grief and, sort of figuring out where to go next with finances, you need to put a financial plan in place, that how is this, whatever you have now access to, is going to last you till you actually deal with the emotional repercussions of that. And on that, just a quick question that's come in from the audience. Mary is asking, how quickly should the pension agency be informed of the demise? So Jigisha, if you could just answer that as well.
You need to inform them most of the time, as I said, that normally 21 days is when you will get the death certificate. Once you get the death certificate, I think you need to intimate them as soon as possible. Now, one thing which is very important over here is to access the phone and the emails of the deceased, because most of the time the OTPs, the link, everything will come to the registered email IDs and the phone numbers. So having those access is also very important. I would suggest to intimate some of these agencies as soon as possible. If you can't do that, as I said, take a professional help who is specialized with this. You will find some people who will be able to help you out with small fees. So take those help and finish off those formalities which needs to be done, because there are a lot of paperwork which is involved. And many of times, as I said, that you have to go personally to settle these cases, where you have to go to their office, sign the things and take the check. Then they will only give the check to the nominee or the person who is the amount is billed to. So they will give the check only to that person, and it's a still traditional form where the amount will not transfer electronically. They will give a written check to them. So start doing this process as soon as possible. So that's the.
Thanks, Jigisha. I think that was very informative. And Celin, I have a question for you from the audience, and then I'll move to Dr. Brunda, where one more question I have from which arrived on email. So Bhaskar is asking, for an individual who's a citizen of other country but holding an OCI card, should the will be prepared in his or her country of citizenship or in India where they were born?
Will can be made anywhere. That's the beauty of it. And it needn't be registered also. If you register it, it's a good thing. It's an enforceable instrument of law. But a will can be made anywhere, because you can have property anywhere in the world. It's not necessary you have to have a property only in India because you're an Indian. Today, Indians are buying businesses throughout the world. So I think it's safe to assume that they'll have property abroad as well. I have relatives who have property in Dubai, so yes, they can make will wherever.
Sure, thank you. So Dr. Brunda, moving on to you, one question that came in is sort of similar to what I asked you before, but I think it's also to do with if you've lost your spouse suddenly, and I think I find a bit of resonance here. How do you sort of, which direction do you go in, right? And this is the question that Beena asked. Do you fulfill their wishes, or how do you, sort of go forward alone with all that stress and responsibility that entails? So any thoughts on that?
Right. So the thing is that, loss of a spouse is perhaps the hardest thing to bear, right? And like they say, grieving is a very organic process. It comes naturally to you, right? So allow yourself to heal, to give, to vent out your emotion, to talk to people you trust, whatever your body asks you for, whatever your system asks you for. That is why they say it's a very organic, natural process. There will be a lot of people in the community that say, don't do this, do that, this will help you. It may, and there are people meaning well for you, but it may be difficult for you. So listen to your own cues. Do what helps you. Some people in the initial stages just want to take care of all the transactions, just to keep, and then they kind of go through the process, right? It's living through the mission, or living through honoring the wishes of the disease is really a beautiful way of healing. But take your time, don't rush to it. I had a client of mine who shared that her father was a very humorous, loving person. So she set up a humor club, but this happened a year later. So take your time, do things that help you in the beginning.
I think I resonate with that 100% because when my husband passed away, he was doing some 10,000 things at the same time. And a lot of people said, why don't you continue doing this? And I said, I just can't. I cannot deal with that stress that comes with running these 5 things at once. Plus, I have a focus to have my baby now. So my area of focus is that. So you do get peer pressure as well, but you need to, and I 100% resonate with you that you need to do what works for you best because you need to nurture yourself. So thank you for that. Jigisha, one probably last question for you, and then we probably get into wrapping up with a few more remarks. And I think that's a straightforward question. What is the responsibility of a nominee in an account?
So nominee by default, they are just a recipient of the money. They may or may not be the legal head. So if there is a will, they have to, abide by the will, and they need to distribute the amount or give the amount to the legal heirs of the will. Say, for example, if the husband has left, if the account is in the husband's name and the wife is a nominee, she's just recipient of the, the amount. Now, if there is no will, the amount is to be distributed equally between the legal heirs. So the wife and the kids are equal recipient if there are adult kids or whatever it is. So you need to distribute the amount equally. If there are 2 kids, then wife and 2 kids will have 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of that amount. So that is the duty of the nominee, that they are just a recipient. If there is will or no will, they have to follow the process, legal process.
So just a quick add-on to that, then what happens to elderly parents in this case, right? In case, let's say somebody's passed away and they have elderly parents, but the nominee is somebody else, and they're not legal heirs, right? So they don't get anything.
So as I said, that legal heirs are basically wife and the kids, but as Celin said, that it is the duty of it's bound that the legal the parents, elderly parents, and the grandparents need to be taken care of. So if this thing can be resolved amicably between the family, because see, parent have also lost their kid, and the wife has also lost the husband. So if things can be resolved amicably, that can be done. If not, there might be some legal complications. One party may decide to go to the court and get the settlement. So
Celin, do you want to add to that from a legal standpoint?
So here's the thing, with respect to nominee, the courts are pretty clear and also the regulations are pretty clear. The nominee is just a nominee and their status does not change from nominee to a legatee just because the person is deceased. So a nominee will receive the documents. They can only transact with the organization like a bank or an insurance agency or a mutual fund company or something like that. But they cannot take the money. They cannot liquidate anything. So the thing is, since you asked about, maintenance of elderly parents, now if the deceased is dying without a will, then they all will, whoever are dependent on that deceased, they will all have a share in it. So you will have to apply for a letter of administration. Only then you will be able to distribute it amongst yourself. And also, if there is a will and the deceased had his or her parents dependent on them, then the senior citizens, as in the parents who are dependent of the deceased, they can claim maintenance from the people who have inherited from the will. They do have that scope.
Okay.
The law provides them that provision.
Yeah, I think that's great because that's an important aspect, I guess, a lot of people have to deal with nowadays. And I think Mary had an add-on question to that if it's mentioned in the will that nominee can avail the amount, won't it hold good? I guess then they become the beneficiaries, right?
So
one more point to add over here is that even if the person passes away, you will have to file the tax returns for that person. So that is also a duty of the legal heir or the wife or a parent, whoever is inheriting the properties or the amount. They have to be a representative and they have to file the income tax returns. And when you for up to 2 years you can file the tax returns, and with the last return you need to have a death certificate attached and close the file of the income tax. So that also needs to be done as a process.
Thank you. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to actually move to the next part of this discussion. And I think that's something that probably just puts all of us conscious of our own mortality, because what I understand is a lot of these issues happen because there was no preparation for it beforehand, right? When you're, like I said, in your 30s, you're not really thinking about dying, so you're not thinking about putting your finances in order. Some of us think that I don't even have enough, why am I making a will? The nominations are all over the place. So what are some of the things that we should be concerned about now to make sure that in case something happens to us or our loved ones, nobody's crumbling around trying to deal with these things? So maybe, again, I'll start with the emotional aspect of that first, because that's also dealing with your own mortality. So Dr. Brunda, if you could start on that.
Yeah, so it's a very, very difficult question to answer, Supriya, because I think in death there is nothing like preparation, because it's a very traumatic experience. Just one thing that I may want to leave is that when someone we love dies, we feel that a part of us has gone as well. But what we need to remember is that the part of that person always lives with us. Right? So that is something that will never go away. So we need to keep on reminding ourselves that what the person has taught us, what the person is going to be a rich memory that remains with us through this lifetime, right? And we need to nurture and honor that. I'm not sure what is it that we can do for preparation, especially in COVID times, because it has come like a bolt of hot thunder falling on us, really.
True. Yeah. Just put death in a very stark reality for everybody.
Right.
So, any thoughts on this, Celin, in terms of legal standpoint? Like, what can we do now to prepare for it? You're on mute.
Sorry, I was unmute. I didn't realize that. So, if you are asking me from a proactive perspective, it's important, I believe, everyone to have a will, or at least get your affairs in order. At least have a document that says that I have made investments in so many places. These are my pension accounts. This is my provident fund. Have it detailed somewhere and share it with someone in your family whom you trust. It's important to have that because it's painful to see family members suffering for simple things like they don't have food and where to live. Suddenly they'll be thrown out of their family. It has happened to countless women wherein they have been thrown out of their families with their little ones just because their husbands passed away, and so it is important to have that you have, if not a will, at least some document that says that you have this so many properties here and there and so many people are eligible to have a stake in it. And it is also important not only just to write about your assets but also about your liabilities, as to whom do you owe money or who owes you money. It's important to write that as well, because there is a statute of limitation to all of these things. So if suppose somebody owes you money and that person passes away, then if it is documented somewhere, somebody in the family can actually go and file a claim for it. But if there is a statute of limitation, you come to know 10 years, 15 years later, you cannot file for anything. So I think proactiveness is required there. And if there is a will or if the person dies intestate, the Supreme Court, like I mentioned earlier, there is a 3-year period from the time of the death of the deceased. You have 3 years to file for probate and letters of administration. So you have enough amount of time to get your affairs in order and to approach the court.
Thank you.
That's
I
all.
think that was very helpful. Jigisha, any final remarks from you on this?
Yeah, so as Celin said, the documentation of whatever your investments, your properties, your PPF, your PF, whatever it is, just document it. There are a lot of passwords and, the account numbers which are attached. So write it down somewhere. And as she rightly said, share it with somebody who you trust. Normally it's spouse. They have to know this, and normally I've seen many women who come across and tells me that all these things are managed by my husbands. I don't even look into it. That I think perception has to change, and women has to start looking into it. And normally as I said, that when you get inheritance or when you get this sudden responsibility of managing your finances, if you are prepared, it is better because you will be able to deal with it in an efficient manner. But if you are not prepared, your inheritance will also go away, and your other finances, because if you are not aware of these money where it is, then many times it is lost. You don't know if there is a demat account somewhere lying and there are few lakhs worth of shares lying in it, and if you don't know, if you are not aware about that account, how will you liquidate that? How will you use that in the time of need? So this is absolutely important. And I think men or women both have to start taking interest in the finances, have a financial plan in place, have a bill in place, and no matter what, even if the husband passes away, even the women, a single woman can also make a will and say that tomorrow, if anything happens to her, what should happen to the kids, because if there is a legal guardian identified tomorrow, then you will have to go there and get the help from that legal guardian to look after the kids if the kids are minor. But otherwise, the family will be struggling that who will take care of the kids and all these. So it's very, very important to write down and keep it in a safe place and share it with somebody.
Sure. Thank you. I think it's been a very, very informative discussion, and there are two very key takeaways, at least for me here, which is men definitely have the upper hand when it comes to managing legal and financial affairs, and women need to really start focusing more on those aspects of life and mortality as well. Whereas women seem to have slightly more handle on their emotional healing, and probably it's time that men need to start thinking about how it's okay to express grief and not just look at it in a transactional mode, but be comfortable with what you're trying to express. So thank you all so much for sharing your views today. It was really eye-opening in some of the aspects, and it makes me rest easy that I am doing some of these things so that my kid is at least taken care of if something happens to me. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Sanjay to close this session.
Thank you very much, Supriya, and thank you for such a wealth of knowledge which came out today. These are the areas which we are unaware of or tend to ignore before we realize that it's already late. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jigisha, Dr. Brunda, and Celin. It's been an honor and very valuable session. Supriya, that was very well conducted. Thank you very much. All our attendees, thank you for keeping the patience and also sharing the questions. Some of the questions, since they come from an individual set of experiences, I really want to thank the people who sent the questions, because they are sending the questions on behalf of a lot of others who are hesitating to ask that question. So attendees and people who raised those questions, thank you very much.